What's up, guys? Welcome to April 19th as we dive into 1 Samuel chapter 30, where it talks about David destroys the Amalekites. 3 days later, when David and his men arrived home at their town of Ziklag, they found that the Amalekites had made a raid into the Negev and Ziklag. They have crushed Ziklag and burned it to the ground. They have carried off the women and children and everyone else, but without killing anyone. When David and his men saw the ruins and realized what had happened to their families, they wept until they could weep no more. David's two wives, Ahinoam from Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal from Carmel, were among those captured. David was now in great danger because all his men were very bitter after losing their sons and daughters, and they began to talk of stoning him. But David found strength in the Lord his God. Then he said to Abiathar the priest, "Bring me the ephod." So Abiathar brought it. Then David asked the Lord, "Shall I chase after this band of raiders? Will I catch them?" And the Lord told him, "Go, yes, go after them. We will surely recover everything that was taken from you." So David and his 600 men set out, and they came to the brook Basor, but 200 of the men were too exhausted to cross the brook, so David continued the pursuit with 400 men. Along the way, they found an Egyptian man in a field and brought him to David. They gave him some bread to eat and water to drink. They also gave him part of a fig cake and 2 clusters of raisins, for he hadn't had anything to eat or drink for 3 days and nights. Before long, his strength returned. "To whom do you belong and where do you come from?" David asked him. "I am an Egyptian, the slave of an Amalekite," he replied. "My master abandoned me 3 days ago because I was sick. We were on our way back from raiding the Kirathites in the Negev, the territory of Judah, and the land of Caleb, and we had just burned Ziklag. Will you lead me to this band of raiders?" David asked. The young man replied, "If you take an oath in God's name that you will not kill me or give me back to my master, then I will guide you to them." So he led David to them, and they found the Amalekites spread out across the fields, eating and drinking and dancing with joy because of the vast amounts of plunder they had taken from the Philistines in the land of Judah. David and his men rushed in among them and slaughtered them throughout the night and the entire next day until evening. None of the Amalekites escaped except 400 young men who fled on camels. David got back everything the Amalekites had taken, and he rescued his 2 wives. Nothing was missing, small or great, son or daughter, nor anything else that had been taken. David brought everything back. He also recovered all the flocks and herds, and his men drove them ahead of the other livestock. "This plunder belongs to David," David said. Then David returned to the brook of Basor and met up with the 200 men who had been left behind because they were too exhausted to go with him. They went out to meet David and his men, and David greeted them joyfully. But some evil troublemakers among David's men said, "They didn't go with us, so they can't have any of the plunder we recovered. Give them their wives and children and tell them to be gone." But David said, "No, my brothers, don't be selfish. With what the Lord has given us, He has kept us safe and helped us defeat the band of raiders that attacked us. Who will listen when you talk like this? We share and we share alike, those who go to battle and those who guard the equipment." From then on, David made this a decree and regulations for Israel, and it is still followed today. When he arrived at Ziklag, David sent parts of the plunder to the elders of Judah who were his friends. "Here is a present for you, taken from the Lord's enemies," he said. The gifts were sent to the people of the following towns David had visited: Bethel, Ramoth, Negev, Jatir, Areor, Sifmoth, Eshtaol, Zachol, the towns of the Jeremielites, the towns of the Kenites, Homa, Boaz, Asham, Athach, Hebron, and all the other places David and his men had visited. 1 Chronicles chapter 12 verse 20 to 22. Here is a list of the men from Manasseh who defected to David as he was returning to Ziklag: Adnah, Jozabad, Jezuel, Michael, Josh, Jozabad, Elihu, and Zelathai. Each commanded 1,000 troops from the tribe of Manasseh. They helped David chase down bands of raiders, for they were all brave and able warriors who became commanders in his army. Day after day, more men joined David until he had a great army, like the army of God. Chapter 31. The death of Saul. Now the Philistines attacked Israel, and the men of Israel fled before them. Many were slaughtered on the slopes of Mount Gilboa. The Philistines closed in on Saul and his sons, and they killed 3 of his sons, Jonathan, Abinadab, and Melchishua. The fighting grew very fierce around Saul, and the Philistine archers caught up with him and wounded him severely. Saul groaned to his armor-bearer, "Take your sword and kill me before these pagan Philistines come to run me through and taunt and torture me." But his armor-bearer was afraid and would not do it. So Saul took his own sword and fell on it. When his armor-bearer realized that Saul was dead, he fell on his own sword and died beside the king. So Saul, his 3 sons, and his armor-bearer and his troops all died together that same day. When the Israelites on the other side of the Jezreel Valley and beyond the Jordan saw that the Israelite army had fled and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned their towns and fled. So the Philistines moved in and occupied their towns. The next day, when the Philistines went out to strip the dead, they found the bodies of Saul and his 3 sons on Mount Gilboa. So they cut off Saul's head and stripped off his armor. Then they proclaimed the good news of Saul's death in their pagan temple and to the people throughout the land of Philistia. They placed his armor in the temple of Ashtoreth, and they fastened his body to the wall of the city of Bethshan. But when the people of Beth-Jabash Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all their mighty warriors traveled through the night to Bethshan and took the bodies of Saul and his sons down from the wall. They brought them to Jabash, where they burned the bodies. Then they took their bones and buried them beneath the tamarisk tree of Jabash, and they fasted for 7 days. 1 Chronicles chapter 10, verses 1 through 14. Now the Philistines attacked Israel, and the men of Israel fled before them. Many were slaughtered on the slopes of Mount Gilboa. The Philistines closed in on Saul and his sons, and they killed 3 of his sons, Jonathan, Abinadab, and Melchishua. The fighting grew very fierce around Saul, and the Philistine archers caught up with him and wounded him. Saul groaned to his armor-bearer, "Take your sword and kill me before these pagan Philistines come to taunt me and torture me." But his armor-bearer were afraid and would not do that. So Saul took his own sword and fell on it. When his armor-bearer realized that Saul was dead, he fell on his own sword and died. So Saul and his 3 sons died there together, bringing his dynasty to an end. When all the Israelites in the Jezreel Valley saw that their army had fled and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned their towns and fled. So the Philistines moved in and occupied their towns. The next day, when the Philistines went out to strip their dead, they found the bodies of Saul and his sons on Mount Gilboa. So they stripped of Saul's armor and cut off his head. Then they proclaimed the good news of Saul's death before their idols into the people throughout the land of Philistia. They placed the armor in the temple of their gods, and they fastened his head to the temple of Dagon. But when everyone in Jabesh Gilead heard about everything the Philistines had done to Saul, all their mighty warriors brought the bodies of Saul and his sons back to Jabesh. Then they buried their bones beneath the great tree at Jabesh, and they fasted for 7 days. So Saul died because he was unfaithful to the Lord. He failed to obey the Lord's command, and he even consulted a medium instead of asking the Lord for guidance. So the Lord killed him and turned the kingdom over to David, son of Jesse. 1 Chronicles chapter 9 verse 40 to 44. Jonathan's descendants. Jonathan was the father of Merib-Baal. Merib-Baal was the father of Micah. The father of Micah the sons of Micah were Pethan, Melech, Tariah, and Ahaz. Ahaz was the father of Jada. Jada was the father of Elamath, Asmaveth, and Zemrai. Zemrai was the father of Moza. Moza was the father of Beniah. Beniah was the son of Zaphiah. Zaphiah's son was Elisha's son was Azel. Azel had 6 sons whose names were Azrikam, Bokeru, Ishmael, Shiriah, Obadiah, and Hanan. These were the sons of Azul. 2 Samuel chapter 4 verse 4. Saul's son Jonathan had a son named Mephibosheth, who was crippled as a child. He was 5 years old when the report came from Jezreel that Saul and Jonathan had both been killed in battle. When the child's nurse heard the news, she picked him up and fled. But as she ran, she dropped him, and he became crippled. 2 Samuel chapter. Now we're getting into 2 Samuel chapter 1. David learns of Saul's death. After the death of Saul, David returned from his victory over the Amalekites and great spent days in Ziklag. On the 3rd day, a man arrived from Saul's army camp, and he had torn his clothes and put dirt on his head to show that he was in mourning. He fell on the ground before. He fell on the ground before David in deep respect. "Where have you come from?" David asked. "I escaped from the Israelite camp," the man replied. "What happened?" David demanded. "Tell me how the battle went." The man replied, "Our entire army fled from the battle. Many of the men were dead, and Saul and his sons are also dead." "How do you know Saul and Jonathan are dead?" David demanded of the young man. That man answered, "I happened to be at Mount Zeboah, and there was Saul leaning on his spear with the enemy's chariots and charioteers closing in on him. When he turned and saw me, he cried out for me to come to help him. 'How can I help?' I asked him. He responded, 'Who are you?' 'I am an Amalekite,' I told him. Then he begged me, 'Come over here and pull me out of my misery, for I am in terrible pain and want to die.' So I killed him," said the Amalekite told David, "for I knew he couldn't live. Then I took his crown and his armband, and I have brought them here to you, my lord." David and his men tore their clothes in sorrow when they heard the news. They mourned and wept fast all day for Saul and his son Jonathan, and for the Lord's army and the nation of Israel, because they had died by the sword that day. Then David said to the young man who had brought the news, "Where are you from?" And he said, "I am a foreigner, an Amalekite, who lives in your land. Why you are not afraid to kill the Lord's anointed one?" David asked, and then David said to one of his men, "Kill him." So the man thrust his sword into the Amalekite and killed him. "You have condemned yourself," David replied, "for you yourself confess that you killed the Lord's anointed one." David's song for Saul and Jonathan. Then David composed a funeral song for Saul and Jonathan, and he commanded that it be taught to the people of Judah. It is known as the Song of Bow, and it is recorded in the book of Joshua. Your pride and joy, O Israel, lies dead on the hills. Oh, how the mighty heroes have fallen. Don't announce the news in Gath. Don't proclaim it in the streets of Ashkelon, or the daughters of the Philistines will reject, and the pagan will laugh in triumph. O mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew or rain upon you, nor fruitful fields fruitful fields producing offerings of grain, for there the shield of the mighty heroes was filed. The shield of Saul was no longer be appointed with oil. The bow of Jonathan was powerful, and the sword of Saul did its mighty work. They shed the blood of their enemies and pierced the bodies of the mighty heroes. How beloved and gracious were Saul and Jonathan. They were together in life and death. They were swifter than eagles, stronger than lions. O women of Israel, weep for Saul, for he addressed you in luxurious scarlet clothing, in garments decorated with gold. Oh, how the mighty heroes have fallen in battle. Jonathan lies dead on the hills. How I weep for you, my brother Jonathan. Oh, how much I love you, and your love for me was deep, deeper than the love of woman. Oh, how the mighty heroes have fallen. Stripped of their weapons, they lie dead. And so that's the end for today. Right off the bat, holy smokes, the song that David wrote for Saul and Jonathan is incredible. It's absolutely incredible. In verse 24, it says, "Oh, women of Israel, weep for Saul. Weep for the man that literally tries to kill me. Weep for the man who caused so much pain in my life. Weep for the man who literally cannot accept the fact that God has moved on from him." It's like, do you have the capacity to forgive those who wronged you? And not only to forgive, but to honor their life. I know that's going to be a struggle for me, but because I believe in God, because I want to live a life that's as honoring to Him as I can, and yet being humble, that means that I have to honor and love those people around me, even if it happens to be my enemy. And David is a great example of what it means to honor your enemies by asking other people to mourn with you about the death of your enemies. That's like a beautiful picture of the love of God when it comes to loving your enemies. And how he described both Saul and Jonathan as mighty heroes that unfortunately has fallen. And it's and then it's asking God to come and heal, not come and heal, but come and protect them specifically, because actually no, I did that wrong. No, writing songs that really honor Jonathan and Saul for all the things that they've done for the country, just to show maybe not everything Saul did was bad. Maybe it's just towards David as bad. Maybe he does love his country more than anything else in the world. But yeah, David just perfect example of somebody who loves their enemies. And so as we keep moving backwards, then we got to this guy who ran to God, or who ran to David, proclaiming that he killed Saul. And that's the thing about life, is where have we started to get this idea God will be pleased that we would kill somebody for whatever reasons? God is not the God of death. God is the God of life, and He will end people's lives for a reason. Saul died, and stuff for a reason. But the thing that's really crazy is this guy literally claims to have killed Saul with pride. Because he's expecting some sort of reward from David, but David does not tolerate such a hateful crime, which is to kill somebody. It's like, no matter how much you want to be with somebody, no matter how much you want something from somebody else, you have to understand that killing people is not the way to go about glorifying God. Killing people is not a way to solve conflicts. It pushes all the conflicts down, but it never resolves the conflict. You just let those sour history turn you into a bitter person, into a revengeful person. And like I said, like, God is not gonna bless you for killing somebody, no matter how good your intentions are. That is just absolutely demonic by the young man who thought it was a good idea for him to kill Saul, instead of just letting Saul die a natural death. I mean, not a natural death, but like a wound death. Nobody was like, he was not taking part of except for the Philistines. It just shows like sometimes we think that we can be rewarded based on our intentions, even if it means crossing the line and killing somebody. It's like, no, it does not. It does not. God's not gonna be pleased if you kill somebody. That's just demonic. Do we not all have a chance to get to know Him, especially non-believers? So you have to realize that people die. You have to let them die in accordance to God's timing. And maybe God's timing is not actually God's timing, because people commit suicide, which in that life may be shorter than what God had intended. But yeah, just to show like, stop killing people for whatever reasons, no matter what. Killing is never the answer to anything. It just leads into more divisions, hatred for one another. And so that's just something that really stood out to me. David, and obviously David's hospitality towards the homeless man, really shows like how humble he is. Towards people who are literally like has no business to be talking with him. And so that's something that stood out to me. And this is like something else. Like, so after the Philistines killed Saul, they took his body to their temple to put it in front of Dagon. And it's interesting because if we like revisit the past, how like the Philistines tried to put the tabernacle into in front or next to I think Dagon as well, how Dagon fell and broke in pieces beside the tabernacle. And people could like dismiss this part of the story really easily. It's like, yes, understand Saul's body is not the Ark of the Covenant, but he is an Israelite person. He is an Israelite, somebody who's descended from, who is part of God's chosen people. And it's crazy because like his body was being put in there, and yet Dagon, he's in that, like, the thing is like, I would thought like Dagon would have fallen down in front of a dead body that happens to belong to God's people or that happens to belong to God's people. I thought that God would not tolerate that disrespect. But then when Dagon seems to have survived, I just realized like God has left his soul a long time ago. And so obviously Dagon didn't fall, because when Saul died, he did not accept God. He did not turn back towards God. Instead, he turned away from God and did everything that was just absolutely dishonoring to Jesus. I mean, I guess not to Jesus, because Jesus was not the term they used back then, but like, he did everything he can to basically dishonor God, when he knows perfectly well that Jonathan's not going to be a king, and yet he still tried to force his thing. He still tried to force his way into things. And when you force things onto other people, force things. Like, whenever it comes to forcing somebody to do something, you are gonna know that you're in trouble. It never ends well whenever we force people to do things. And so we have to realize to have self-control over these, 'cause over like to have like I forgot what I was saying. Sorry, I'm really tired and stuff, but just be able to have that self-control so that you don't keep feeling envy towards somebody. Having that self-control, saying, okay, God, I accept where you're coming from, and I will submit my life, submit my crown to you now, instead of holding on to that crown, saying, God, I'm gonna do whatever within my power to still be the king. It's like, no, you don't get to decide. You don't get to decide. We don't get to tell God what we want him. We don't get to tell God what his plans are. That's just like reality, and we have to. The mature ones are the ones who are able to accept the reality that God has set before us. And and David obviously shows true masculinity by crying in verse I'm trying to see it in verse 4 of chapter 30, where it says they wept until they could weep no longer. It shows like the men in David's army, including David himself, wept, which is to show like men, it's okay for you to weep, it's okay for you to cry, it's healthy to cry and stuff. And like and even in the midst of all of that, when his people start doubting him because they lost their sons and daughters, David is still able to find the strength in the Lord, his God, in verse 6 of chapter 30. And that's powerful because it shows like as long as we ask God for strength in whatever areas of our life, that could be like our friendship, it could be like patience, it could be like time, it could be strength when it comes to dealing with difficult people. It's like God is going to give us those strengths, but we all have to be the ones to be asking him for it. He's not going to give us something that we didn't ask for, you know. And so with that being said, I hope that you guys and like I said, we've finished the first Samuel, so we'll be moving on to 2 Samuel and stuff. But yeah, that's all I have for you guys today, so may you guys go and walk with God today.